in climbing, what you're doing is you're getting yourself into a position where your system is ramped up, you're scared, most of all, your breath to calm yourself down so that you can keep going. Because if you get too ramped up, if the anxiety takes over, you start shivering, you start shaking, and then you fall off the wall.
And I couldn't believe what I was discovering. I was like, oh my God, like I can actually shift my relationship with my own stress response in this moment and immediately elevate my performance. I was like, shit, how come nobody ever told me that you could do this?
All right, I'm here with a man named Adam Hart. Adam is a nervous system optimization coach. You work for a company. Your company is called Clear Impact Coaching. Am I right?
That's correct.
Adam, I am stoked to have you on the show. We have hovered around one another for years. I remember 10 years ago, at least, I bought a cookbook that was written by you called The Power of Food.
Yeah.
uh, I was really just waking up to the power of food in my life at that time. And this was like a perfect book for me to get into. You live in a town near where I was at that time, and you're into similar work that I'm into. And you have a particular knowledge around how the brain works. You're a mindset coach. And so I'm really excited to have you on the show to talk about some of the work that you do with people around mindset, how to deal with things like ADD and ADHD, and how to optimize your life, your mind in a world that is very dopamine focused and that wants to pull you in 100 different directions. So,
Yeah.
first of all, thank you for coming on the show, and please fill in any piece of the bio that I screwed up.
No, it's great. I appreciate it. I mean, I've got 10,000 hours in multiple ways, so it's not always the easiest thing to define what it is I'm up to. But at the core, it's about performance, just human performance, and
Mhm.
wanting to optimize that in every area of our lives, whether it's athletics or just being a great parent or in business. There's an underlying theme of what's involved in that I think we could all tap into a little more.
Yeah, and another piece around my desire to have you on the show is the fact that you're a parent. You've got a couple kids, 8 and 11, if I'm not mistaken, and I'm really trying to align with other parents and get their advice as I embark on that journey for myself. I think there's a number of men that listen to my show that are also parents that appreciate that content too. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think if I could set the tone for two pieces of subject matter that we could touch on multiple times in this episode, it would be ADHD and the scattered mind, as well as parenting and how to be a good parent, conscious parenting, and you know how to be a good parent within the subset of having a scattered mind, right? And living in a dopamine world.
Yeah.
So I think maybe a great place to start, though, would be considering that I know just a little snippet of your story would be uh, what was the turning point that got you into this work as a mindset coach, and that got you so passionate about food? Because I think
Mm.
that's related as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, part of the same mechanism for sure. And I grew up with a really revved up mind. The impulsiveness and the hyperactivity, the lack of the ability to sustain attention. So, that's my own personal experience being diagnosed as ADHD in my teenage years, predominantly my early teens. And when my transition came when I discovered how I could actually interact with my own mind in a way that was different from what anybody had ever told me growing up.
Mhm.
And when I found this new perspective, it changed the course of how I got to live moving forward.
I can definitely relate to being a young man with a revved up mind. I was often in school placed either at the back of class or
Yeah.
sometimes they'd place me around the corner, like by the coat racks where other kids couldn't see me because I was that much of a distraction for other kids. Other times the teacher would elect to put me at their desk, just with a chair beside them at their desk.
Right.
uh,
So
or
crazy.
sometimes out in the hall, right?
Um,
Because I was kind of this like hyperactive, didn't know what to do with my own energy, and in the end, got into more and more trouble as I, let's say, became more and more powerful. Like as I got
Mhm.
older and had more force, let's say, my teenage years, started getting in bigger trouble,
Yeah.
suspensions, etc. I'm
Yeah.
curious how um, your scattered mind, so to speak, or your yeah, intensity affected how you were growing up, and how that showed up in your school and in your home.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really, excuse me, really great question because it's an area that I often shy away from talking about because there's
Mm,
some self-esteem, shame,
mm,
guilt around it. But mine got so bad where my ability to be self-aware around this, the two dominant ways I was coping were I was fortunate it wasn't alcohol because that could have been a lot worse, or drugs, but it was, for me it was sugar. So
mm.
coping, sugar was the dominant one, and this one is an odd one that not many people have heard about, but it makes complete sense. Horror movies,
Ah, interesting.
right? And so I had a real addiction to watching horror movies and eating sugar.
Uh,
The culmination of that, though, I mean, I think at the end of my teens, I got arrested. If I'm being completely open and honest, I got
mhm.
arrested for theft because I had become so detached from my life and so impulsive that I didn't have a connection to what my actions were at a level that that I was craving to, but I just didn't know how to get access to it. And so here I am addicted to sugar and horror movies, and my impulsiveness is leading me to taking actions that are just not appropriate.
Uh-huh. Well, you're in good company, man. I got arrested for stealing as well, and a few other minor charges in my youth. And uh, I was definitely self-soothing in a number of ways. I was smoking pot, drinking alcohol, honestly, like putting any substance in my body that I could find.
Mm,
Sugar, for sure, was one of
yeah.
them. And yeah, what did that give you? What did sugar and the horror movies? I'm just imagining this, like this nervous system activation, like,
That's
yeah,
it.
like the
That's it.
fear that comes
That's
from
it.
horror movies, this sort of like hyper stimulation,
Yeah.
which is interesting, right? Because we know that ADD appears to be this like overactive mind, and then interestingly, when you give it drugs that are stimulants, so they're typically stimulating for people, it actually calms the mind. It balances the mind a little bit. So
Yeah.
I'm curious if you see a connection there between all this sugar that you were eating in the horror movies, and that hyperstimulation, and the self-soothing for how your brain was working at the time.
Yeah. I think my own personal experience with it, knowing what I know now about it, it makes more sense. But back then, I think it was just trying to tap into these little windows, these like micro moments of being present.
Mm,
Okay, I am actually feeling something here, because I think a lot of my survival mechanism growing up was to just remove myself from feeling altogether. But yet I didn't know how to navigate back into exploring emotion with all the stress as a child that you go through, and then you just end up with these looping patterns of thinking that often lead to symptoms like ADHD symptoms.
mm,
The sugar and the horror movies, and there was probably a few other ones, but those are the big ones. They
mhm,
kind of were little windows into actually getting a chance to feel in a way that I knew how to interact with that.
uh-huh,
It was like a familiarity that I wanted
mhm,
more of, whether it was
mhm.
obviously not the healthiest way to do it, but it was something that I didn't know any other way to feel,
Yeah.
you know?
So you come to a place where essentially, this inevitably happens to everyone when they're on that kind of a trajectory where they're self-soothing, they're treating their own imbalances in a way that sort of pushes them down a path, an unhealthy path, let's say, right? My bottom was, I landed myself in rehab at
Yeah.
age 15. I was in
Yeah.
rehab from 15 to 16 for a year, right? And uh, a a good group of mentors who had been through what I had been through helped guide me back to myself through a sort of spiritual experience and awakening of sorts, to realize like how lost I was and to be honest about all that. So That was a huge turning point in my life, and I was lucky that I had parents who were willing
Mhm.
to take such a big step to put me there, and then I had those resources in my town.
Yeah.
I there was so much chance that occurred for me there. I'm curious for you, what was your like your hitting bottom
Yeah.
situation, and how did you turn that corner?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, definitely could have used community back then and mentors. You know, it's the value I have for that now. It's right at the top
Mm,
of how I live. But my rock bottom, my folks, they went through that divorce like so common. I was 13 years
mm,
old, and my sister kind of went off the rails a bit. So I was trying to be the good kid, which I think is why I gravitated to addictions that weren't so destructive, even though I still had these impulsive behaviors.
mhm,
It wasn't so much I didn't want to go near the drugs. I didn't want to go near the alcohol because I knew it would it would just upset my mom more than she was already what she was going through. And
right.
I ended up with occupational burnout in my 20s,
Mm,
and having that moment, that rock bottom moment of, here I am now 24, 25 years old. Yes, did I graduate with a degree and I plowed through school and, being diagnosed with ADHD and learning disabled? Yeah, it was a struggle. It was a struggle. And I just wanted to just keep pleasing my mom through that whole process. So I went and got the degree and came out of school, had no idea what to do next, and so I started working for a family company. So I have a degree in sociology, I have a diploma in international business management. All sounds beautiful, but
yeah.
yet I wasn't really attentive in that whole process, and was still uncertain about life.
And still, still caught in your own addiction with sugar, horror movies.
Oh yeah, huge.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
And
the
were
horror
you
movies.
medicated at the time? Like,
What's that?
were you on medication for ADD and ADHD?
I was put on Ritalin in my teens.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Me too.
for a small period of time, and then I asked to just, I didn't like who I had become. I'm definitely not here to knock the pharmaceutical industry, but there's definitely some really powerful ways that I didn't know about back then that I'm happy I know about now, to really manage how my mind was functioning, how I was feeling. And I did hit that rock bottom moment in my mid 20s where my sugar addiction caught up to me and I became pre-diabetic. I was 50
Mhm.
pounds heavier than I am now, still heavily addicted to sugar, heavily addicted to screens as a way to escape, and not knowing where to turn next.
I think my impression of what it was like back then is this is the 90s
I'm
we're
doing
talking
this.
about,
Yeah, I just
right?
turned 50 last month, so yeah, this is the 90s.
Yeah, I was, ADD became a thing in the 90s,
Mhm.
I was medicated as well. I was
Yeah,
on Ritalin and Dexedrine for a few years, like basically from grade 4 to grade 8,
yeah,
and took myself off those medications because I felt like a zombie, and it did calm me down. Those stimulants did actually sort of like balance me, but I felt kind of dead inside and I had no appetite. I got really skinny. Um, and I just didn't like it. I didn't like it. So I took myself off and ended up self-medicating with cannabis, alcohol, anything I could find, as well as porn and masturbation, which is probably worth mentioning here because I think a lot of people can relate to that. That's another way to feel like, I just feel
yeah,
alive for like,
totally.
30 seconds or a few minutes, right? Um, and I was lucky that I had somebody step in to help me and give me a program for recovery focused around addiction, and subsequently around just learning how to manage my own energy. But I see myself as so lucky at the time because virtually nobody knew how to deal with ADHD and ADD type symptoms, or even really addiction, very well back then in the 90s. And I had parents who were willing to sort of put me in rehab, and we had the proximity to a treatment center. But most of the guys that I know who have dealt with similar things that I've dealt with and you've dealt with have ended up all the way into their mid 20s or late 20s into their 30s, and sort of hitting this bottom and being like, maybe they did achieve a level of success in their lives. They went and got the degree and achieved a level of status and power, pleased mom and dad, right? Made people happy. But here you are struggling with a lot of your own uh, the
Yeah.
issues closest to home in your body, in your brain chemistry, still unresolved, no solutions present,
Yeah, it's
right?
that completely unfulfilled experience to that point.
Mhm. So yeah, tell me about sort of your hitting bottom experience and what got you out of that. How did you get lucky and find what you found?
Yeah, I mean, again, I was still escaping my life in any way possible, numbing it out, and not trying to think too much about it because I couldn't find a solution. You know, I kept being told, again, I'm not knocking the system, but I kept being told about, I mean, Adam, you should go on this diet, and you should try this medication, and you should try this fitness program, and I just nothing was working. And I know now it has so much to do with the way that those types of solutions impact the nervous system and the stress response. So I just got really lucky. I didn't have the community aspect. I didn't have the mentorship, which I can really appreciate now the power of that. And I think it's really a critical foundational piece of anybody's wellness is having that. But for me, the solution came in the form of a sport. I discovered, I'm downtown, like I mentioned. You know, I have a friend of mine. We're both suffering the same way, and we were downtown Toronto, just hanging out. And we stumbled upon Joe Rockheads, which is a pretty popular indoor rock climbing gym, and I said to myself, "Wow, this is kind of a neat thing. Let's check this out." And so we went in there, and I was like, "Oh wow, okay, so here's something new, and it's kind of exciting. Let's give this a try." And right away, I have a fear of heights, and the anxiety started to kick in, and I started climbing my first climb, and I had a full blown panic attack, and
Uh-huh.
started sweating and yelling at my buddy to let me down. But there was something that happened in that moment that I recognized right away was a little different from what I have experienced before, and I became very curious on what that was, and so I immersed myself in that community to begin to learn what I was discovering, which is what led
Mhm.
to where I am now for sure.
I can see the connection between the sort of sugar horror movie addict and the thrill seeker in that way, who finds like this sort of sick uh attraction and enjoyment in the initial panic attack that comes from your rock climbing experience, and kind of goes home and thinks, I kind of want to do that again. It kind of lines up pretty well,
Well, and
you
I think
know?
at first that's what it was. There was something about it that kept drawing me back and drawing me back, and all of a sudden I was like, okay, I'm going twice a week. Then I'm going 3 times a week. And now I'm going 4 times a week. And I was like, okay, this is an addiction. But there was something that started to happen that I started to recognize pretty quick, but didn't understand it. But it was definitely this idea of being able to be in this new relationship with how my brain was operating. Because when you're climbing, especially in an indoor setting, obviously I eventually took it outdoors, but on the indoor setting, it's like a safe environment that you get to start to understand that, wait a minute, I could actually manage my own stress response in the
Right,
moment it's happening.
right.
Nobody ever told me I could do that. And climbing, when you start to climb, you realize you have to control your breath to be able
Mm,
to manage your performance. So in that discovery, I was like, oh my God, as I'm learning how to climb more efficiently, I'm also having this healthier relationship with how my brain's functioning. And I'm
mhm.
noticing that my brain wants to trigger me in certain moments, and I'm able to teach my brain to let go of trying to trigger me.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, oh, this is something. And I bet you I can start to do this in all those other areas of my life too that my brain tries to trigger me.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I can see the translation. Uh, for people who haven't rock climbed, I can just back you up on this point and say that once you get above a certain height and you start getting tired and your hands start slipping, nobody likes fall. Well, maybe some people like falling, but
No.
most people don't like that feeling of slipping off the holds on the wall, even though the rope has got you. particularly when you're lead climbing. Like there's top level
Totally.
climbing where like if you slip, you're gonna fall like this far, like just like a few inches, right? But then there's lead climbing where if you're bringing the rope up with you, you're actually gonna fall past the last clip below you, and you could fall 10 feet and then stretch, right? It's freaky. It's very freaky.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
it's a real fight or flight experience
mhm.
that, yes, okay, so can you look at climbing and say it's an extreme sport, that's an adrenaline junkie sport? Some would say yes, but in if you talk to most climbers, it's not. It's actually a self-actualization sport because it's a
Mhm.
longer drawn out process that you have to manage your fight or flight stress response, otherwise you can't do it. You could hurt yourself.
Yeah. 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 So I'm really seeing the lines between I've had a few people on the show here to talk about somatic therapy and what somatic techniques there are for healing your internal stress responses, your internal anxieties. And in climbing, what you're doing is you're getting yourself into a position where your system is ramped up, you're scared, and your goal is actually to get as far as you can, maybe on a particular route. If you choose a route that's like right at your edge, you're trying to get to the top of that route, and the holes are just barely within reach, but you've got to give it all you've got. And what that means is calming your stress response down, lowering your heart rate,
That's it.
and using technique and rest points, but most of all your breath to calm yourself down so
That's
that
it.
you can keep going. Because if you get too ramped up, if the anxiety takes over, you start shivering, you start shaking, and then you fall off the wall, and you don't get to your goal. So you pretty quickly learn, like, okay, as soon as I start to get tired, I lean back in a somewhat of a rest pose, and I take some really deep breaths, and I really try to calm my system down. And in that moment, you're essentially doing what is done with somatic therapy, which is I enter the space that's a little bit stressful, it's a little bit outside my comfort zone, and I self-soothe and I calm. I self-soothe and I calm. And okay, now I'm back to myself. I'm grounded. I feel like I can keep going. Next hold. You move one
It's
up, right? So
And I
it's
couldn't
now.
believe what I was discovering. I was like, "Oh my god, like I can actually shift my relationship with my own stress response in this moment and immediately elevate my performance."
Hmm.
I was like, "Shit, how come nobody ever told me that you could do this?"
Yeah.
Being put on medication as a kid for ADHD and bouncing off the walls for so long, and then as I entered into my 20s and had my burnout moment, it's like nobody said you can actually work with your nervous system in this way. And
Hmm.
but the thing was for me is I needed climbing to do that. That was the only way I knew how to do it. So I shifted my whole life to just be focused on rock climbing and left my job and moved out west and
Hmm.
immersed myself in a small community based off of wanting to become a mountain guide, a certified mountain guide. And because I was all
Uh,
in, I was like, this is making
yeah.
me feel really good. I don't know how else to do this. I'm all in. But then that process led to optimizing my nervous system in a way that led to the food side of things. Really really diving into the plant based world for a little bit there.
You mentioned that that it became an addiction, and I think that's worth touching on. That your this thing that obviously made you healthier and led you into a better phase of your life, and it maybe even saved your life.
Yeah.
We could
Oh
say,
yeah, absolutely.
uh, was an addiction for a time because you jumped into it full on, and albeit like addiction being something that causes some level of harm to your life, right? Some form of consequences. And if you're doing something to the extreme, there the other parts of your life suffer. And sometimes people argue that when people get into recovery, that their recovery becomes an addiction, like, oh, AA or 12 steps becomes people's
Hmm.
addiction. And my counterpoint to that is like, yeah, and I think most of us believe in harm reduction, and that's
Hmm.
harm reduction, right? So like baby steps. Yeah, maybe a person's going to too many meetings or doing too much climbing for a time, but like they're loading, they're they're front
Totally.
loading, like they're
Yeah.
catching up right now, and they don't know what else to do. And
Yeah.
yes, they need to find some balance in their life at some point, but give them a break,
Well, and it
so.
took me a while to find the balance. As much as it was a healthy pursuit. It took a while for me to fully understand the power of what I was experiencing so that I didn't need to have it come from just climbing anymore.
Right.
And when I started to discover that I could actually start to use everyday life in a way that allowed me to have that same experience,
Hmm.
that was it. After that, it was like, okay, well, now I'm gonna live this, like
Right.
still included some climbing for sure, but it allowed me to start to actually, share these discoveries with others.
So yeah, I imagine that along the way, if you're associating with climbers, there's actually a lot of vegetarians. I think in the climbing community, there's a lot of people who are at the very least like conscious of their diets and trying to eat right, because the way you eat dictates how heavy you are, which dictates how good of a climber you are, probably at some level. So you got into food, and you also probably started to learn how different foods affect your brain chemistry in different ways. So I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, well, to be honest, too, at the core of this, it was, it's just manifestation. I started to understand that the nervous system is the portal to how I get to reflect how I'm feeling. And as I reflect how I'm feeling in a more positive way, all of a sudden I'm starting to attract more positive opportunities. And one of those came in the form of food and exploration into food. As really, for me, it almost became a bit of an art. I realized that, up until 28 years old, I just ate. I didn't know there was any difference, from growing up with processed food to all of a sudden getting a chance to play with food yourself in the kitchen. That was a new space for me. And
Mhm.
I really wanted to elevate my performance climbing. And as I was learning how to play with food, I had a passion for sharing that with others.
Mhm.
And next thing I knew, people kept saying, Adam, you're really good at the food thing. Why don't you start to do more of that? And, it was an exciting time because it was, I was getting praise from others for the first time. That again was part of that addictive piece for sure, where I was like, wow, I love people liking me and wanting me to have this exchange with them. And so food just became the next way that I started to fulfill that.
Makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense that positive feedback from people is something that you want more of, right? Like we all have this need for community and connection, and I think a lot of addicts, if I could use that term, seek out other uh, pe- uh, people who are into the same stuff they are, right? People to use with, people to reinforce their addiction. And when you get into recovery and you want to be healthy, you start seeking out people who share those values, and that can be very helpful on your recovery journey. So, um, yeah, I'm the one thing I feel like I'm good at in the kitchen is coffee, and
I love it.
my friends tell me that I make some of the best. I do like a modified bulletproof coffee, and there's some people that say I make the best coffee they've ever had.
Well, there
And
you go.
that feels really good, like makes me want to make that thing better, and what makes you want to open up a coffee shop and offer that to the community. And
Right. I
so,
just I just couldn't believe how good I was at at this. Like, so again, up until that point, I'm just fast food a lot of the time. And
mhm,
that's all I really knew is processed food. And all of a sudden I'm living in a small community. I was living in Golden, BC, immersed in the mountain culture. And, my roommate at the time, he had all these glass jars with all these different nuts and seeds and grains and legumes. And I was like, what is happening with this guy? Like, I don't understand any of this.
yeah,
And he just started showing me a few things. And next thing I knew, I was watching the Food Network and saying to myself, okay, that's a bunch of crap, but how do I turn that into something healthy with all these new ingredients I'm learning about?
hmm,
And I turned out to be really good at it and started formulate all these really neat recipes for myself and all my friends to take into the mountains, all these different kinds of like nutrition bars and stuff. And
yeah,
it just took off from there and, turned into the cookbook and all that other stuff. So it was great.
yeah. It's an amazing cookbook.
Yeah, thanks,
So,
man.
from there, you end up really learning to master your mindset, and you become a mindset coach, a nervous
Yeah.
system optimization coach. And now you can sort of see how it takes a while to really get to the point where you can coach people on a holistic basis. Like I was a counselor when I was 20, but I didn't have enough of these different life experiences, these different sides of things to really like life coach someone on sort of all the aspects of life. I had to go out there and try and fail and learn from this and learn from that and sort of put
Sure.
it all together in a package so I can start to see how um people don't really make really great life consultants, you could say, until they're in their 30s or 40s when they've accumulated enough of these sort of trials and errors and experience in life. So you start to integrate this into mindset coaching.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a level of this that does come from maturity, and obviously years of implementation. I mean, my
Mm,
only goal has been nervous system optimization. And I realized that there's an area of that, like it comes down to, I was, this is funny. I was out yesterday with a friend of mine. We're playing Frisbee golf. So Frisbee golf is another sport that I've
love it.
picked up or
Yeah,
manifested. That's another way that I play with stacking wellness.
yeah.
I'm outside, I'm grounded, I'm connecting with a close friend, using visualization, playing with heart rate variability, all these beautiful things. But what he said to me is like, yeah, what we're up to is it's all around intelligent health. And I was like, yeah, it's a really, really great way to define it. And I'm mindful of language, but I really do think it's got a lot to do with intelligent health. It's removing ourselves excuse me, from the constant noise of constantly being told what to do and all these new coaches popping up and saying, oh, you should try this, you should try this, you should try this. It's like there's a
Mhm.
way to tune into our what's just intuitive, that comes from building a strong foundation is what leads you. And the foundation is the relationship between our brain and our nervous system.
Mm,
It's the foundation.
mhm,
Once you've got that and you understand the right tools that can allow you to harness that, then you can start to build the resilience around it. Then you can start to look at nutrition and sleep and movement and your relationships. But we tend to be focused on all those in a way that doesn't look at the foundation. And so if you get the
mhm,
foundation solid first, then you can build the resilience with all those other areas in a way that's holistic.
mhm.
And I think we miss that a lot of times.
Right, yeah, because we like to just fix things, right?
Well, that's it. The brain loves that too. The brain is, it's part of the, whether we label it ADHD or anxiety or whatever you label it, it's just the
Yeah.
brain's function loves to feed off of the stress of needing to fix something.
Uh-huh.
So yeah,
So, I guess the question follows, like, how do you connect the brain to the nervous system and create this sort of conscious connection, so that less deeper integration is possible?
yeah. Well, I think and this is idea of what's the roadmap, and like I mentioned to you before that I kind of put this into a sequence to make it really easy for anybody who resonates with this. Not for everybody, but for anybody who says, "Yeah, I really want to tune into this." There's an easy way to do it, but we first have to be willing to explore what our patterns are and
Mhm.
have a look at them and say, "Okay, so I've got these patterns in how I'm showing up in my life." And if I'm really going to start to transform how these are, it's not about trying to fix any one of them. It's
Right.
about getting very clear on how to start to create a different relationship with those. Because all those have been created because of how your mind functions. And if
Mhm.
we recognize that the brain is really looking to survive at all times, and if it predominantly uses our hormones and our neurotransmitters as sources of energy, so adrenaline and dopamine dominant,
Mhm.
then I need to learn to nourish my nervous system in the moments that my brain is trying to do that.
Right.
And if you do that, then what it's going to do is it's going to create coherence through the vagus nerve, and it's going to train your nervous system to live in the parasympathetic state. That's
Uh-huh.
the state of presence. That's the state where fulfillment is experienced.
Mhm.
And so we just have to cultivate that as our foundation, which comes from some very specific practices. And yeah, the number one in that is working with your breath in those moments.
Mhm. Right. So, if I picture my pathway through my day 15 years ago, it was kind of this like wake up, stress, 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 rush to work, traffic, stressful, get to work, usually like sit down and have a meeting, which would actually calm me down a little bit. And then there were just these moments of like up and down
Yeah.
stress in the day. And I was just kind of like riding the waves. And there wasn't really much of a level of predictability around like, how I was going to cope with that stress in the day.
Yeah.
And one thing I do know though is that if the stress was high enough in that day, at the end of the day, I would try to use something to de-stress. I would
Totally.
need something to like bring me down. And so yeah, there was a lot of this sort of like epinephrine uh flowing through my veins without my control in the day. So
Yeah.
um
And the problem is that most of us don't know that we're stuck in these habitual patterns. So we don't know the difference that of which we can feel. We know we have symptoms, we know we're not quite feeling fulfilled, maybe we have brain fog, maybe we're emotionally agitated, quite often, maybe we have sleep issues, maybe we have weight, whatever it is, it's coming from a dysfunction of the nervous system. And we don't fully realize how stuck it is
right.
until you train yourself to know what the opposite is. I just got lucky that climbing, which is a fight or flight experience, is a real fight or flight experience. So I train myself to understand it. Most of us don't really train ourselves out of fight or flight because it's just our everyday lives.
Uh-huh.
But when you actually start to cultivate a relationship with the opposite to that, which is not what society has set up for us to experience, but when you do, you realize, wow, there's another way to play this out. It just requires cleaning your vagus nerve up in a way that gives you that freedom,
Mhm.
and that comes from our lifestyles. How do you set yourself up where every day you have these routines that are meant to optimize your nervous system, not meant for you to lose weight and have better sleep and have all these other things. It's all about, let's just focus on the nervous system. The nervous
Mhm.
system does everything else for us.
Uh-huh. So that's your inside out approach is like if you start here, you start sort of brain to body, your connection to what is right and healthy and most optimal for you in each moment is going to become more clear, and you're going to make better decisions about when you need exercise, when you need meditation, when you need to eat healthy, when you can take a break and go eat a cake.
It
Uh,
all flows it all flows to us with ease. Obviously, the process is number one is you got to get familiar with your own patterns. Then you got to learn how to work with your mind, which isn't hard. It
mm,
just needs again, it's that cleaning up of the vagus nerve and
mhm,
allowing the coherence to be what shows you the pathway in. Then the next step is you got to get clear on what you do want. Like, how do I want to feel now? Because the nervous system is always expressing, and if we're not clear on what we do want, then we just vibrate uncertainty. So we have to get a little more clean on what is it that you want? Like, how do you want to feel every day? What's your vision for your life? What are your values?
mhm. I really like the piece just to roll back a little bit too around getting clear on what your patterns are and how you show up, and eh, that you didn't say and purging those things from your life like they're a
Not at all.
scourge, right?
No. Yeah. No, you
Because it's not
cannot go.
possible.
We cannot eliminate. We cannot change in that moment because it just gives the brain more fuel in relation to that stress response.
Right,
It's not the right approach.
right.
Right? We got
Yeah,
to
just
soften this relationship.
noticing how you are, bringing a level of compassion and acceptance to that observation so that it gets more and more clear for you,
Yeah.
because awareness is actually, yeah, I mean, awareness without action is useless, but when humans become aware of something that isn't working for them, they tend to want to resolve that, right?
Yeah.
So the awareness is actually very important. I spend a lot of time with guys helping them dig into their past and their current patterns and how their patterns are connected to their past and how
Yeah.
those patterns are harming them currently in their lives without being overly negative about it, and definitely staying out of guilt and shame territory, because that doesn't help. But the awareness really does help. The awareness of the pattern helps in a big way.
Yeah, and again, if we don't know an opposite to that, because most of this is coming from, okay, so there's the two quadrants, at least my experience. The brain will work with the two quadrants in terms of the triggering. We have on
Mhm.
average 70,000 thoughts a day. And so from a very young age, the brain starts to learn what's triggering us because it wants the adrenaline from the response.
Right.
So then you grow up with a lot of these self-esteem, self-worth, shame, guilt thoughts and feelings because your brain has you locked in those pattern ways of thinking. Then as
Mm.
you enter adulthood, and again, this is coming from my own experience, all of a sudden my brain was locked into, oh, look at this. Now we have all these adult themes. We have the health and relationships, career and finance. And once you start getting stress in all those, it starts to try and fix those. So you
Mhm.
have these past, which we know, based off of depressive thinking, most from childhood, and future, which is most of what our adult experiences are, trying to fix these themes of our lives, which leaves very little space for presence.
Yeah.
All we're doing is we're teaching the nervous system to help the brain let go of the past and the need for the future to be different so that we can learn how to work with now, how to work
Uh-huh.
with this moment. And that takes something, that takes some real work. But when you get there, then you get to start to play with what's possible in this space, which is a whole other realm of fun things we can do. But you can't go there unless you've built the strength first,
Yeah.
the foundation.
Uh, that solution seems too simple, Adam, too boring.
I
Focusing on
know, right?
present, focusing on the now. There's no dopamine there.
I
I don't.
know.
Give me some quick fix. Give me a
Ugh.
60-second video that's going to fix my life,
But
Adam.
like if we could give folks access, because my and I'm assuming that we're very similar in this way, but you'll let me know. But my number one, um, and again, I'm mindful of the word addiction, but what I crave most is to be in connection with another human being
Yeah.
because I know that I'm doing it now authentically. I feel it. I'm not in my own way from having the most beautiful interaction with somebody. I'm actually there in contribution to them.
Hmm.
It's like that. Like I don't know anything more beautiful to experience in life, to be honest.
Hmm.
So that's cool.
Yes, a powerful force. I
It
mean,
is.
romantic relationship, sex,
Yeah.
friendship, connection with your mother and father as a child, like, yeah, that is perhaps the most powerful force that we experience.
Right. So if you can find yourself in a position where that's what you're manifesting, and you understand the parameters to how you're actually creating that,
Mhm,
it gives you access to a very fulfilling life.
mhm,
But it's not just in your relationships. The same energy starts to show up in how your finances are working, how all your relationships, how your career is unfolding, how your health is unfolding. It's all coming from the way your nervous system is vibrating.
mhm.
And if your brain is left to keep you stuck in feeding it the quick energy it wants, you'll never have this as your way of being. You'll have glimpses and you'll have moments and you realize, wow, I really like feeling that way. I wish I could get back to that.
Mhm, mhm.
Well,
Yeah, that really resonates with me. I think about being around a person who's very sort of flighty, who's very dopamine focused, always looking for the next thing. They're staring at their phone all the time, or they're looking elsewhere when you're in the room with them. um, that energy is not very trustable. You don't want to really go much deeper with that person. You don't want to, give them the keys to your kingdom. It it's not the most trustable energy because you feel like it can be pulled any which way. Versus, the people of the highest integrity who are the most trustable in my life are these very grounded, in the present moment people who are like there with you when they're there with you, right?
yeah.
And they're, you could feel like they're here on the earth, and they're not, there may be things swirling around them, but they're able to just be present here in the moment.
Yeah.
with you or with whatever they're working on. And that type of energy is very trustable.
And it's a beautiful energy, but I also feel like the energy, so in that experience for me, it's like recognizing, okay, I have this really deep love for myself now. Like I understand what that feels like now, which then puts me in this space of being able to work from an overflow.
Mm,
And so if I'm in the space of somebody who's distracted, I'm so deeply empathetic for them because I know what they're going through.
hmm
They're
hmm
suffering. So I have to be mindful of, okay, what's my role in providing this person with access? And this is the idea of co-regulation. So you think about
hmm
kids,
hmm
and this has been my biggest learning of the last 5 years specifically with my kids, is knowing that, wait a minute, how I am showing up in their presence is what they're learning from. It's not the words I'm saying, it's the
uh,
energy my nervous system is expressing.
uh-huh.
And so being able to recognize that, okay, if I can reset what my brain is trying to create around this moment. So my kids, let's say for example, we wake up and they're screaming and yelling and it's all noisy in the house, and my nervous system normally responds very quickly to noise and I get triggered. But
Yeah.
now I do what I do and I practice in the moments and I reset that. Now all of a sudden I'm in a co-regulating state where
hmm
I can contribute to them feeling my peace and calm.
hmm hmm
Now you provide that for other adults. Most adults have not had that experience in childhood. It's the most powerful experience of love from
Yeah.
from another,
Yeah.
is that co-regulation.
Co-regulation. Yeah, let's talk co-regulation, and I suppose first we'll talk self-regulation. We have this process that I do in my brotherhood, which we call the samurai stare, where it can only be done in person, but basically it's a great way to start a meeting or to finish a meeting where you have all the men stand up and walk around and stand in front of each other and face each other, look in each other's eyes, and sometimes link your breath in and out together and just look in each other's eyes. No communication, just this. We don't use the word co-regulation, but that's what's happening, right? The
Oh
men are
yeah.
really sort of deeply connecting to each other,
Oh yeah.
and then we have them hover around the room and do that with every guy. When you sit back down in the circle, like you feel like, oh, I'm here and I'm with all of you guys. Like I
Right?
feel all of you
Beautiful.
guys like we're fucking dropped in right now,
Yeah.
right? So there's definitely a co-regulation happening there. But
And
yeah, I
so
love.
beautiful. I mean, for you to hold space for that to occur.
Hmm,
It's, I don't know, man, my sense is it's the most beautiful gift we can give each other and give
yeah,
others, because we're
yeah,
not we're not bred and taught how to have that kind of deep, intimate relationship with ourselves to feel comfortable in those positions and to
hmm
learn our own biology and what's really happening, but then also to facilitate that for others. I mean, we both know we just need a whole lot more of that right now.
yeah. It's that situation is very special, quote special in this the way that we have society set up right now.
Yeah.
Like a person in the normal course of their lives isn't going to have that experience very much, except for perhaps with their lover, right? And so we're creating this special scenario that isn't fake, where we get to have the thing maybe that a lot of people don't even realize that they want so badly.
Yeah.
Um, so
And nor do
what?
they know how to get it once they get a taste of it.
Yeah,
Well, I
yeah,
shouldn't say taste because that has a weird energy to it, but just the experience of it. And how do you
yeah.
now start to tune into that to a higher level where you get the choice to feel like that all the time if you want?
hmm
Not all the time, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah, regularly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Adam, maybe you could share a simple technique with us, something that you practice daily that helps you drop in. Because I think that, for me, Wim Hof breath work really changed my life because I was able to
Yeah.
sort of drop into these little mini
That's
sessions
it.
with my breath and my body, and just like
Yeah.
drop in. And you have to do that stuff regularly. It has to become a habit in your life where, like, sometimes you just automatically jump into it. It becomes an instinct for you.
Yeah.
That's when it's starting to really take hold in your life, and it can really alter how your day is occurring. So
That's
what's
it.
something that you can take with you into your day?
Yeah. I mean, there's many things that I had brought in over the years. Everything that I had brought in and continue to bring in for me have the number one focus of training my nervous system even more.
Mm.
How can I, so you think Wim Hof breathing, you think cold thermogenesis, another beautiful example that I only use to train my stress response.
Uh-huh.
Grounding is another one, but the number one by far has been a breath practice that I call heart flow. It's based off of heart rate variability. Takes 33 seconds to do. I discovered it from climbing, where I'd be halfway up the chief. If you know the chief, it's like, I'd be on
Yeah.
the middle of it and full blown a few times, like full panic attack in the middle of
Yeah.
this thing, hundreds of feet up, and you just can't do that. And so I kept putting my hands on the rock and my forehead on the rock, and I would just do this like rhythmic breathing.
Mm.
And in the research after, this is years ago, and I started to discover, okay, so this is about heart rate variability. This is playing with the variability, the beats of my heart.
Mm.
And so I realized, okay, so in climbing, I can do this really quick. Okay, well, why am I being told I have to meditate all the time as a form of peace and calm? Why can't I just use this breath practice?
Right.
So I did. And 33 seconds, essentially what you're doing is you're doing a rotation of 4 seconds in, 7 seconds out for a total of 33 seconds, no pausing, through the nose, out the mouth, or you can just do the nose both times. Some people have a hard time with the nose on the out as well. But it takes practice and repetition of doing this 3 times or more every day. 4 seconds in, 7 seconds out. I put my hand on my heart just to connect to, the coherence part of this. I close my eyes usually if I'm in the right position. I'm just sitting comfortably or standing comfortably. A lot of times I'm outside grounded when I'm doing this, because it really helps to drop me into my parasympathetic. Like, I feel it now. I feel the shift. It's just very,
Mhm.
very calming. And as long as the rhythm is clean on the 4 and 7, you're going to notice yourself with the ability to drop into that space of peace and calm a lot easier, a lot quicker, to then keep growing from.
Uh-huh.
So I'm at a point now, and have been for many years, where my nervous system just automatically, it's part of the autonomic nervous system. It automatically drops me into that breath practice when my brain tries to use thoughts that trigger me.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
It
right.
it
So
took a
you
while.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, that's a very short practice. I just did some breathing while you were talking. I just did, 4 in, 7 out, and found my whole system sort of dropping down and really connecting to gravity and becoming more present.
I mean, we know there's hundreds of different breath practices. I get it. And what makes this one different? I mean, yeah, there's lots out there. I needed something that fit my lifestyle.
Yeah.
I'm a busy dad. I run a business coaching company. I got lots of things with the kids, but I want to be present in all that. And I want to continue to optimize my ability to feel fulfilled. And by utilizing this breath practice that, thanks to climbing, taught me that I can actually do this in a time frame that fits my life.
Mhm.
All it required then was a commitment to practicing it, and having a community around me that understood what my goal was, my vision was
Mhm.
for this.
Mhm.
That's kind of was the evolution of the community that I built around it.
Yeah, I remember when you were sharing about this practice online a couple years ago, and I joined your 28-day breath challenge, and I set a reminder on my phone to do this breath work. I think 3 times a day, to stop and 3 minutes a day or whatever it was achievable enough for me that I was like, sure, I'll sign up for that. There's a lot of things right now that I'm like, nope, can't do it, can't do it. Like,
You're right.
I'm reclaiming time, I'm reclaiming energy. There's too many things to do, too many things to sign up for. But man, the barrier to entry on a practice like this is so low. It's it's really just, like, do you really want to do anything to change? Because like this will work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
And that's it.
remember,
I mean, we have to have the barrier be one that is broken down for us to have an experience that we realize, okay, that's what I want. I want to feel more at peace. I don't want to be chasing time all the time. How do I get more
Mhm,
time in my day? I need more
mhm,
time to do this. Okay, well, that's because you're not operating you're at a level that's available to you. But we have to be okay with the simplicity of this and just commit to it. and it opens up the doorway for what you can put your energy and attention towards next. Because yeah, there's more that you have to do afterwards, but this is the primary thing to focus on first, because it helps to set the foundation up for you to manage all the other beauty that you can play with next.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
if we're not willing to, then it's just, at some point the symptoms, they're screaming, like that's what symptoms are. They're just screaming
Yeah.
at us to say, hey, we got to put some focus here. But yet the brain will look at the symptom and say, well, let's just get you stuck in trying to fix it. Well,
Yeah.
that's hard.
The mind will convince you to neglect your self-care until you're hitting bottom, and then you're
Yeah.
like, "What happened?"
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, I work with guys in recovery from addiction, as you know, and to simplify things, I believe there's two things you really need to recover from addiction. You need a program, a structure to follow, something that you got to do, and you need a community.
Yeah.
Those two things are proven to have the highest impact. I know I went to a presentation from a statistician who looked at AA and tried to find like what is it, what is the core of the program that like makes it work, and the two statistically significant factors were the program that
Yeah.
people follow and the fellowship, the
Yeah.
community, the
Yeah.
meetings. So
And
tell
if
me.
I could add one more on there, because I think in the community side, like I have it as the foundation, but the human connection piece. So community
Yeah.
falls under human connection. But one thing that I've
Yeah.
been playing around with lately has just been in terms of communal values, communal vision. And
Mhm.
this is in terms of specifically my family. So all of a
Mhm.
sudden understanding that, okay, so community isn't just, the community I have around me. It's like, well, okay, so how do I integrate the energy of what I'm feeling around what's possible,
Mm.
and so that it's not just me, but it's all of it. So being able to really be clear on what your personal vision is, but also what is your vision for the parts of the community, maybe the community as a whole, or
Mm.
just the family. So we sat down and we did our family values, our family vision, and all of a
Mm.
sudden it's created this beautiful container for how we interact with each other.
Mm.
So and that's a new one for me, to be honest. It's only been the last few months where I'm like, whoa, this is interesting. Like
Yeah.
I'm kind of feeling really strong now, but I see weaknesses in the community parts that I know is coming because of the containers not being held in a way that makes it easy
Yeah.
for them to interact with it.
Uh-huh.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. It does make sense. Yeah. In the 12-step programs, there's the steps, and then they have the 12 traditions,
Hmm.
which governs um how the groups and the individual members are meant to interact with society as well as each other.
Yeah.
And I think there's also one more called there's 12 principles, but there's also something else that helps them govern how to be with one another.
Yeah.
Right.
Because you figure in a community that understands stress response and knows how to support the brain to let go so that you can drop into the nervous system, parasympathetic nervous system.
Hmm.
When you set energy in that parameter, community based off of that, there's something really powerful that starts to happen versus
Hmm.
having community where you still have a lot of the mental structure triggers that's disrupting the energy.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting one to recognize that that's where I'm starting to play more in that sandbox of how to facilitate this presence in this community in a way that allows us all to continue to thrive. And we recognize this. We're at a time in where our ability to adapt is at an all-time high. Multiple stressors keep being added to the pile, whether it's media communication or
Hmm.
AI technology, whatever it is. There's a lot of disruptors out there that the brain unfortunately gets distracted by and
Hmm.
denies us the ability to have critical thought and be really important contributors to how things continue to evolve. And
So how are you creating a community around this work that you do?
yeah, I mean, predominantly it's through my coaching program.
Mm.
Um, there is a capacity for my understanding of how to do that socially that I've kind of pulled away from because of how my nervous system interacts with social media.
Mm-hmm.
So it hasn't, do I have a Facebook group? Yeah, I have all that stuff, but predominantly it's about anybody who really aligns with being present and being in a community of more presence. Then that's for me is the primary, is continuing to grow a connection with those who are ready for that kind of a commitment. And
Mm-hmm.
it's through group coaching for sure,
Yeah.
because
Yeah. So
it needs the intimacy.
yeah. Yeah. So the message is like, join a community. Don't do this on your own. Don't try to, change your habits, change your mind on your own. Join a
Totally.
community, because the community will give you so much more fuel, and it serves the part of you that just needs other people to, in a way, like convince your mind to change, right? Like there's something about, there's
Or to
the, maybe
let
it's
go.
the tribal part of us that like, yeah, yeah, I want to make this shift in my life, I want to make that shift in my life. You can try that on your own, but it's really difficult. If you join a community of people who are on that same journey, who are doing that same thing, that's where you're going to have some impact. That's where you're going to break through your internal resistance. That positive peer pressure is going to pull you towards the thing that you want to do. Like,
Well,
it
and
makes sense.
especially if you have the right tools to play with your own reactivity to that.
Hmm.
If you have the right tools in the right order to create more space from how your mind currently operates and be able to drop into living with more presence, then to engage with community around that. I mean, it's a pretty special experience. And like I mentioned, I do have that roadmap I created for anybody who's curious about it. 6 steps that I created based off of what I've shared here. It's really easy for anybody to walk through, and if it resonates, just practice it. It
Hmm.
has an immediate result of feeling more peace and calm when we're willing to look under the hood a little bit and take that exploration inwards. It doesn't have to be difficult. I think we've been fed a narrative that's not quite accurate. As long as we know that what we're after is just feeling more peace and more calm, not all the bells and whistles that we're being told we need to chase, then
Hmm.
it's a possibility. And if I can be a source of support for anybody in that regards, that's beautiful.
Yes. So yeah, you've created this 6-step
It,
handout PDF
it's
that
called
people
the
can
Unleash
download.
Your Energy Roadmap.
Yes.
That's the name of my
Fantastic.
program, is Unleash Your Energy. So I had to go with
Unleash
it.
your energy. I
Yeah.
love it. Yeah. And so in a way, this is, I think this is really cool that people can have a bit of a takeaway from this conversation. You've done the homework for us. And where can people get that? Well, I mean, I'm going to put the link in the show notes, but where can people find this work and find you?
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, my website's the best place, which is www.clearimpact.io. Clearimpact.io. And the download is right at the top there.
Great. I love it, Adam. You showed your age by saying www
I
dot.
know, right? I love it. I love it. Hey, don't stress me out, man.
Oh man, I really enjoyed our conversation, and yeah, I just have a lot of admiration for you and where you've gone in your journey, and the peaks and the valleys, and how you've learned some really powerful tools to pass on to other people, to pass on to your kids. We didn't get into parenting, but
Yeah.
someday I'll have you back on the show and we can talk all about parenting. I would love to do that if
Oh
you're
yeah.
willing.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, but yeah, thank you, Adam, for doing what you do. Thank you for writing that beautiful cookbook, The Power of Food. Thank you for the tools that you're sharing with people through your work, and for being an agent of change in this world, and an agent of nervous system regulation. We
Yeah.
need that so bad.
I
Yeah.
love it. Yeah, thank you, Ben. Listen, and I appreciate you and how you show up, and obviously you're holding space for folks to have the same exploration. So, we're kindred spirits in that way, and I'm super grateful that we're connected, and look forward to growing our friendship.
All right. Thanks a lot, Adam.
And Andy.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for watching another episode of the Evolving Man podcast. Please Please like, subscribe, leave a comment below about what you got out of this episode. I really appreciate the engagement. And please share it with a friend. If this conversation was inspiring for you in some way, send it to somebody who might like it. All right, my relationship program is the Conscious Relationship Council. It's for men, and you can check it out. I'll leave a link down below. If you're dealing with an addiction and you want to conquer it, the Freedom from Addiction Circle is something that I run. It's a private coaching group with me and a small group of men. You can reach out on a social media channel of your choice or through my website to find out more about that. All the best to you.